to Black Agenda Television. In this edition, Bruce Dixon addresses the shallowness of the new crop of black talking heads in the white corporate media. What good is it to have black television commentators who sound and think just like their white colleagues? We'll have a conversation with Dr. Cornell West, the black public intellectual and activist. Dr. West will talk about the challenge of mass incarceration and pervasive racial surveillance in President Obama's second term. The question is often raised these days, is Africa in danger of being recolonized? Glenn Ford says the continent has already been conquered militarily by the United States.
AFRICOM, the United States Military Command in Africa, is now the top gun on the African continent, and the bulk of this conquest has occurred on President Obama's watch. Where once the great Pan-Africanist and Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah envisioned a politically and economically united Africa with a unified military to defend it from European and American domination, we now see a continent in which most African armies are mere proxies for American military power. The American conquest of Africa is all but complete, despite the fact that the U.S. has only one major military base on African soil. How has this happened? One must first understand what AFRICOM is and what it is not. The U.S. military's mission in Africa is not to set up huge American bases on the continent. That would smack of colonialism, and the masses of African people would oppose it. Instead, AFRICOM's mission is to infiltrate and subvert all of the armies of all of the nations of Africa, to make them totally dependent on U.S. money, training, and equipment. In short, to make African militaries more loyal to the United States than to their own countries and people. In this, AFRICOM has been fantastically successful. In the 5 years since its founding in 2008, and despite the fact that it has no formal headquarters on the continent, AFRICOM has forged deep relationships with the militaries of every country on the continent except two. Only Zimbabwe and tiny Eritrea have avoided entanglement in the AFRICOM matrix, which is why these two countries are on the American hit list for regime change. All of the rest of Africa's militaries, every single one of them, has been to some degree integrated into the U.S. military command. African independence on the military level has ceased to exist. African armies literally cannot move their forces or effectively command their troops without the participation of AFRICOM. More than 30 African nations, representing the vast bulk of the continent's armed forces, routinely take part in U.S.-led military exercises. The African Union's biggest military mission, a 20,000-man so-called peacekeeping force in Somalia, is in fact directed by the CIA and paid for by the Americans and Europeans. African Union heads of state, in their most recent summit meeting, admitted that all future joint African military missions will require assistance from international donors, meaning mainly the United States through AFRICOM. A 3,500-man U.S. combat infantry brigade is now on permanent duty in Africa. These American soldiers will be stationed not at U.S. bases, but on the military bases of African armies, sharing facilities with African soldiers. That's in line with AFRICOM's soldier-to-soldier doctrine, which encourages the forging of deep, personal relations between American and African officers, general to general, colonel to colonel, major to major, and so on down the ranks. AFRICOM cultivates the loyalties of even the rank-and-file African soldier. The U.S. military brags that it provides medical care to hundreds of thousands of military families in Africa. Indeed, in Africa, like no place in the world, the face of America is the U.S. military. AFRICOM's mission is to create a special relationship between the U.S. armed forces and the armed forces of the nations of Africa, so that no matter how much trade Africa does with China, Brazil, India, or other emerging powers, the Africans with the guns owe their equipment, their training, their salaries, and their loyalties to the United States. While Latin America asserts growing independence, even defiance of the United States, Washington has Africa locked down in a cage of steel. AFRICOM's gift to Africa is war and warlords. America's favorite hired guns in Africa are the leaders of Rwanda, Uganda, and Ethiopia. Look at their faces. Rwanda's Paul Kagame and Uganda's Yoweri Museveni are the principal perpetrators of the genocide in Congo, where 6 million have died since 1996. Museveni and Kagame have the full protection of the United States, which means Washington bears the largest responsibility for the slaughter in Congo, the worst genocide since World War II. This is Meles Zenawi, the Ethiopian strongman who invaded Somalia at Washington's urging in 2006. U.S. advisors accompanied the Ethiopians down to the company level. The invasion of Somalia caused what United Nations observers called, at the time, the greatest human rights catastrophe in Africa. Zenawi died last year, but his regime continues its crimes against humanity, both within and outside the country's borders. These are the men who have been armed to the teeth by AFRICOM. President Obama is fond of saying that Africa doesn't need strong men, it needs strong institutions. But his administration, like Bush and Clinton before him, has built its Africa policy around strong men and warlords and made AFRICOM the dominant institution on the African continent. The U.S. and European overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi's government in Libya removed the strongest bulwark for African independence and set the northern tier of the continent on fire, just as the U.S. set the Horn of Africa on fire with the invasion of Somalia and turned eastern Congo into a killing field. U.S. drone bases now dot the continent, from Djibouti to the Seychelles Islands, to Ethiopia, to Niger, and Burkina Faso. It is long past time to warn of recolonization of Africa. In military terms, the subjugation of Africa is almost complete. African independence has been largely nullified, and millions more will die before the continent is free of the Americans and of AFRICOM.
He's both an academic and a political activist, having taught at Yale, Harvard, Princeton, the University of Paris, and now at the Union Theological Seminary in New York. Dr. West's work is firmly rooted in the traditions of the Black Church, Western philosophy, Africana philosophy, and Marxism. He was instrumental in starting the Stop, Stop, and Frisk movement and lends his name and talents to a host of activist initiatives. He's co-host with Tavis Smiley of the syndicated radio program Smiley and West. Cornell West spoke with Black Agenda Report executive editor Glenn Ford.
If you are aware of anything in black politics, then you're familiar with the name Dr. Cornell West, the public intellectual and activist. Welcome, Doctor, to Black Agenda Television. You're one of the foremost progressive critics of the Obama administration's foreign policy and its domestic policy. Amazingly, you've been accused of being somehow jealous of the first black president. How does that strike you?
Well, first I want to say I'm blessed to stand beside you, my dear brother, and Black Agenda Report, brother Bruce and Sister Margaret and Sister Nellie. You all have constituted a cloud of prophetic witnesses that tell the truth, not about Obama solely, but about the system under which we live, the empire under which we live, and the white supremacist bombardment coming at us, the male supremacist bombardment coming at us. And so for me, it's just a matter of how do we keep alive the legacy of the best of what black people have given us and the world in these bleak times. The age of Obama is a bleak time because there's a fear of the truth, there's a fear of standing up for justice, and there's a fear of being unpopular with a black president. And so people say, oh, you jealous? No, don't psychologize me, don't personalize me. I come out of a tradition. And the tradition says I want to tell the truth. When Obama's doing the right thing, I tell the truth. When he's doing the wrong thing, I'm telling the truth. He's killing innocent children, I tell the truth. And that truth is bigger than each and every one of us. So you get people who are apologists for Obama, who are lackeys and lapdogs and sycophants for Obama, who want to psychologize and personalize both of us as if it has to do with personal motivations as opposed to the validity of the claims that we're making as it relates to justice and truth.
So by calling you jealous, they're trying to dismiss your argument.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, crushed the earth shall rise again. The truth is bigger than all of us. You know, the chickens come home to roost. You're going to reap what you sow. That's our tradition. We know that. They lied during slavery. They lied during Jim Crow. They lied with the new Jim Crow. And no matter what color the politician or the leader, sooner or later they're going to have to deal with what is the truth and what is just.
But in this age of Obama, I suppose you, like many of us, have lost some friends of long standing.
Yeah, I've lost some good friends, definitely. Brother Dyson and so many others, Sister Melissa and the others, they've become sycophants on the Obama plantation. But I'm a Christian, you know, so I try to love everybody and realize that where they are now doesn't fully define their humanity. They have the potential to be better, but where they are now deserves serious indictment and serious criticisms, and that means that friendships do fade away.
At the end of this month, the NAACP, other traditional black organizations are holding a rally in Washington in commemoration of the March on Washington, but you won't be there. Why?
Well, one is that they use it, Brother Martin Luther King Jr. And Martin Luther King Jr. is not a guy, he's not a deity, but he's such a special brother. He's such a courageous, visionary human being. He always concerned about the suffering of the least of these, the suffering of poor people, be they poor people in South Side Chicago, be they suffering poor people on the Hill in Jersey City, the suffering that BW, Moving Images, is concerned about, or the suffering in Africa, or the suffering in Vietnam, or the suffering in Pakistan, and in Somalia, in Yemen, and so forth. And we were not going to hear too much about that suffering at this march. You see, with Brother Sharpton and so many of the others, they are so tied to the Obama administration. The truths that they tell are going to be very truncated. They're going to be very curtailed. So we won't get to focus on the new Jim Crow. We won't get to focus on the privatizing of education. We won't get to focus on the land grab and the gentrification of land in the city. We won't get to focus on working class people. And we certainly won't get to focus on the drones and those bombs landing on innocent brothers and sisters in Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia, and especially the 222 innocent children who have been murdered by the U.S. government so far and counting. We won't get that. We say if Martin were to show up at this march and they ask him to give a speech, what he would say would be so subversive that those on the Obama plantation would be revealed for who they are, which is obsessed with career, obsessed with access, and obsessed with status, as opposed to being obsessed with the suffering of poor black brothers and sisters. All poor brothers and sisters, but you and I recognize that we begin on the chocolate side of town. Because so often people who talk about poverty and class, they tend to overlook the preciousness of Jamal and Letitia. And we believe in the preciousness of Jamal and Letitia.
Well, one would think that one strikes when the fire is hot, with black passions at a height that we haven't seen in some time behind the Trayvon Martin killing and George Zimmerman's acquittal. This would be a very good opportunity at the end of this month to rejuvenate a movement.
No, it's true. And I think we are at a very seminal moment in black history that Brother Trayvon, I think it's hard to come up with a language in terms of the viciousness of that murder and the criminality of it, and the way in which people have come up with ways of talking about it that downplay the rich humanity of Trayvon and the ugly criminality of Zimmerman. But it's a Dred Scott moment. That is to say, it's a clear statement that there's no respect for black life. And you see, that cuts very deep. That's a visceral kind of thing. You got black upper class folk that got upset about that because they're still preciously black, even though oftentimes they suffer from an indifference to the plight of black poor. And so you're right, there's an overwhelming black rage. And Brother Sharp and the others are trying to contain it, and of course Obama and Holder are fearful of it. Because of that black rage is always the first catalyst toward black self-determination, toward black self-respect, and toward black self-defense. And the best of who we are as a black people has always been those who have been willing to forfeit whatever they have, their time, their energy, their lives, for black self-defense, black self-determination, and for black self-respect. And the Trayvon moment and the Dred Scott moment is one in which the disrespect is just so raw in your face that even Jay-Z got to show up at a rally. You know what I mean? Even Beyonce got to show up to say, I'm socially responsible, that Harry Belafonte's wrong, that I've got an organic solidarity with black people who are being disrespected in that regard. And of course, we got a whosoever will let them come. Come on, Beyonce. Come on, Jay-Z. Just be real about it and don't disrespect Harry Belafonte.
Well, on that subject, you were responsible for bringing Jay-Z, the entrepreneur and entertainer, together with Harry Belafonte, the entertainer and political activist and confidant of Dr. Martin Luther King. And now we hear Jay-Z saying that his very presence in the black community is a kind of charity for this community.
Yeah, no, we got to pray for that, brother. I mean, he's a lyrical genius. On the one hand, you're right that when he was kind enough to ask me to talk with him about his book, Jay-Z Decoded, New York Public Library, I brought someone from the older generation, Harry Belafonte, and I brought someone from the younger generation, Lupe Fiasco. I wanted to bring Erykah Badu too, but that's a whole different thing. But to have him embraced by the elder on the one hand and the young prophetic artist in hip-hop on the other. And it was a beautiful moment that we had. They hugged. We talked for half an hour in the green room. So I was surprised because, I mean, the last time they had talked, they were on magnificent terms. But I was surprised at the language on the new CD of Jay-Z using that word boy especially, but the whole tone of disrespect. But see, the thing about it, when you're making that much money, and Kanye got the same challenge, when you deify it over and over and over again, that can get to you. They need to learn from Prince. Prince went through the same process, but ended up actually becoming even more humble. I mean, Jehovah's Witness too, that also helps when you have some kind of faith that reminds you that who you fundamentally are is not only who you are on the stage, that who you fundamentally are is mama's child and daddy's kid, and that you're going to die one day. You're going to deal with catastrophe one day.
But don't his comments really get to the heart of a trend among an element of black folks to believe that simply by being rich and famous, you are somehow giving something. You are maybe a gift to the black community, and you don't have to do anything but be rich and famous.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's what I call the re-niggerization of the black professional class, where you have fear, you have a tremendous sense of being intimidated even though you got big money. So you say to brother Jay-Z, what are you risking? We don't want to just see you successful, we appreciate it. We want to see you faithful to something bigger than you. And faith has to do with risking something. The only way you become deniggerized and free is when you're willing to risk, when you're willing to go against the grain. You show you're not fearful, you're not afraid. But unfortunately, and Jay-Z, of course, is in this sense at his worst. At his best, he's still the genius that he is, but at his worst, he's an example of folk who get so elevated that they don't show courage and take a risk for something bigger than them. So we figure all they got to do, he says, I'm like Obama. If I show up in a room, that's charity and hope. You say, no, it's not. Success is still empty if it's not tied to being faithful, if it's not tied to being great in terms of service or something bigger than you. Do you understand your history? People don't remember the richest man in Alabama. They remember Martin King. They remember Rosa Parks. Nobody remembers who the richest man was in Harlem. They remember Malcolm X. He only had $151 in his pocket, in his name, when he was shot. But we shall remember him forever. How come? He was great. He was faithful. He was tied to something bigger than him and willing to give his life and his death as a form of service to that. That's what Jay-Z got to do. Now, when I talk to him, I just say, listen to Curtis Mayfield and look at his life.
Malcolm X, the great advocate of black self-determination, which you were speaking of earlier. Yeah. But how do black people exercise self-determination? No, how do black people exercise the right to be normal human beings in a society in which blacks are under 24/7 surveillance? And if the cops can stalk black people all the time, why can't George Zimmerman?
New crop of black political commentators in corporate media these days. Talking heads like Melissa Harris Perry, Touré, Joy Ann Reid, and more. But is it really progress when the black chattering class simply echoes their white colleagues? Black Agenda Report managing editor Bruce Dixon doesn't think so.
Dear Melissa, Tory, Joy Ann Reid, it's me, Bruce Dixon, from Black Agenda Report at www.blackagendareport.com. The journalist's job is to make democracy possible, to keep the public informed by telling the truth without fear of or favor toward wealthy corporations, popular politicians, powerful interests, and governments. Since your bosses at Comcast, MSNBC, just like the ones at Fox and CNN and all the rest, have no interest in an informed public, they really don't want to do journalism at all. Instead, they give us talking heads like the three of you. Tory, my man, let's start with you. I want to know how much diligent research, how much moral courage it takes for you to say that you are perfectly okay with President Obama deciding to murder hundreds of Afghan, Pakistani, Yemeni, and Somali children, whole families and bystanders via drones, without accusations, without trials, without even knowing their names, based on secret regulations and profiles. Profiles! Tory, if it's one thing a black man's experience here in North America teaches us, it's that when you are profiled by heavily armed people who don't speak your language and don't respect your culture, bloody and bad things, violent and murderous things will happen. And you okay with that? Just because somebody told you they mean to do us harm? We all know, brother, that you are just repeating what the White House, what the Pentagon, what the intelligence agencies tell you. And that, my man, is just plain lazy. And you, Joy Ann Reid, Melissa, y'all can get some of this too. If there's one thing President Obama does not like, it's federal employees who get tired of doing ugly things, illegal things, criminal things against the public's interest in secret, so they come out to tell the truth. But under this president, the truth does not set you free. The truth can get you years in solitary confinement. It can get you tortured. It can get you a fake trial with a guaranteed guilty verdict and decades like Bradley Manning is facing in prison. Obama has charged more people with aiding the enemy and espionage than the last 10 presidents put together to cover up government crimes and to scare people into silence. And what do y'all do? Y'all get a real journalist on your show, WikiLeaks spokesman Chris Rafson, but you don't want to talk about the government wrongdoing that they have revealed. Instead, you played a reprehensible game of make-believe, where leakers are criminals instead of heroes, where WikiLeaks is a conspiracy instead of a media organization, where Joanne is a tough district attorney and Melissa is a special agent ready to slap on the cuffs. The interview didn't go your way though, did it? Rafson piqued your whole card when he pointed out that Tricky Dick Nixon also declared that if a president does it, it must not be illegal. And you both totally lost it because you knew you had been had.
You know, I have a reflection back to the Nixon era and when President Nixon said in the infamous interview with David Frost when he said, well, when the president does it, it means it is not illegal.
That's the issue.
That is the issue at stake right now.
Look, I get it. I truly do. You are not reporters. And lying, dodging, leaning backward and forward to suck up to a sitting president is always a good career move, right? But you really need to draw the line, ladies, and hating on real journalists just because they do what you will not. Finally, Melissa, where did you get this imaginary history where whistleblowers and political dissidents have to turn themselves in for likely torture, for fake trials, for solitary confinement, and for decades of imprisonment to be legit? while at the same time you flashed Dr. King's old mugshot on TV for proof, even though Dr. King's longest stretch in jail was only 11 days, during which they let him write a book. Come on now, you're supposed to be a scholar. You know that Mandela and Frederick Douglass were international fugitives for years and never turned themselves in. New political prisoners these days get a year or two in solitary, they get one letter a month, they get gag orders on their lawyers and their families, and that's before their fake trials. Of course, we also have older U.S. political prisoners who've been in solitary for much of 2, 3, and 4 decades. You don't do shows about them. People like Jamil El-Amin, people like Mumia Abu-Jamal, people like Leonard Peltier and Russell Maroon Schultz. Though you did do one, I'll give you credit, that scratched the surface of the California prison hunger strike the first week. I hope you do one every week that strike continues. Still, you do not have the historical facts on your side when you dismiss this or the next Edward Snowden as a coward just trying to save his own skin from your comfortable chair at MSNBC just because he or she has not meekly surrendered to authorities. You seem to be choosing to ignore the message and to criminalize the messenger just because for you, that's the best career move. Torre, Joanne, Melissa, if this is really the best y'all can do on the air, maybe you need to stay more in your lane. I'm thinking corny culture criticism for you, Torre. Talk about the next half dozen Trayvons, Joanne. We get one every 28 hours now, don't we? And Melissa, here's an idea. How about more shows about black women's hair, huh? Until the three of you grow the guts and the integrity to represent something besides your own shallow careers on the tube, stop the fronting, stop the hate, and leave the real journalists alone. Sincerely, Bruce. This is Bruce Dixon for Black Agenda Report at www.blackagendareport.com.
That's our lineup for this edition of Black Agenda Television. You can visit the Black Agenda team every Wednesday for a new and provocative issue of our magazine, blackagendareport.com, and listen to us on Black Agenda Radio on the Progressive Radio Network and Black Agenda TV Express on the GoPro Radio Network. It's the place to go for news, commentary, and analysis from the Black left. Visit www.goproradio.com for the next episode and www.blackagendatv.com for the next episode of Black Agenda TV. I'm Ayanna Jones for Black Agenda TV.
That's it.
So good. That's it. Thank you. Oh my goodness. You had sound on me? Oh, this was wireless? Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I felt it on me and I was like, holy crap, I'm about to knock stuff down. I thought I was dragging a wire. All right, it's a wrap?